All right, so if I talk to someone and they say, what do you do for a living? I'm a professor. What do you teach? Meteorology. And you know how the conversation goes from here, right? They pretty much ask me, oh, you study meteors. I saw one of those one time. It fell in my uncle's backyard. No, not meteors, weather. Oh, you study weather. Are you one of those storm chasers, or are you on a television station? Where do you work? Like, well, no, I've never been on television as a broadcast meteorologist. But yeah, I do some storm chasing. It's not a career, but it is a part of my job. Why would you want a storm chaser? Are you crazy or something? And secretly, they really want to go too, but since they can't, they just, tell me that I'm crazy. Well, it used to be the reason I wanted to go was for the excitement. Something different, something I'd never done before. That doesn't last very long. The only way you make it continue to be exciting, like anything else, is you make it continue to be more dangerous. Right? I ride a bike with my kids. It's pretty boring. Other than hanging out with the kids, riding a bike is nothing exciting. I could ride it off my roof, and it'd be very exciting. And it'd be more dangerous. So storm chasing is the same way. You start off small, and you start pushing the envelope, it gets very dangerous. I didn't want to do that. I wasn't a thrill seeker in that way. I was just really interested in weather. I wanted to see as many different weather events, and I wanted to learn more about them. And then I started taking people along with me just to pay for the hotels and the gas. And I realized I'm getting a bigger enjoyment out of watching them than I am from watching the storm. And so why do I storm chase? I can honestly say the reason I do it is these photos. Seeing my students become giddy over things that I've seen 100 times. Something that I may not have driven 6 hours to see, I was more than happy enough to drive 6 hours to show these people for the first time. And so these are, I remember all these events very clearly. This was in Ogallala, Nebraska. We're standing right there on the dam at the big reservoir in Ogallala. And some of these mammatus clouds that you've certainly seen living in Kansas were some of the most dramatic ever, and the students were beside themselves. Traffic was stopped. It was just gridlock all over the dam because people were all hanging out their windows. This is in southeastern Colorado. Actually, the tornado is. We are all standing in the panhandle of Oklahoma. We are 4 or 5 miles, I forget. I'll tell you later in the presentation here. From that tornado, again, this was the highlight of their trip. This photo was all over, and this particular group of students was from another university, from Western Kentucky. This was all over their university website. It's still on their department website. You go to any one of these people's Facebook or Twitter pages, and it's on there. This was a big deal for them, and I certainly enjoyed it. This was in Quinter, the bottom left picture, 2008. This was before it was a class. It was just me and some colleagues. This is in Gerald, Texas, infamous tornado town. One of the most interesting killer tornadoes to ever hit the United States for a number of reasons that are beyond the scope of this talk. But they put up a memorial with some weather shelters, storm shelters. These students had never been in storm shelters, so we all got inside, let them see what it was like on the inside. This was the first annual Fort Hays storm chase trip last year. This was near a little town called Skidmore, Missouri. It was probably the best group photo we got. It wasn't the entire group, but folks in front of a tornado-warned storm that we actually alerted the Weather Service about, and the warning came out essentially because of this photo. So I tweeted this photo to the Weather Service in Missouri, in Pleasant Hill, just north of Kansas City there, and said, hey, here's what's happening right now in Skidmore, and then the sirens started going. So again, kind of very cool, certainly memorable. Other events, this is in the panhandle of Texas, just north of Midland. This was similar location, actually just to the east of there quite a bit. There's another picture from the southeast Colorado storm. This was over the Robins Center just this past summer. All of these things, memorable events. Memorable because of the weather, but more often than not, memorable because of the people. And so I can tell you these stories for all of these moments in time because of the excitement, the interest, the conversations, the photos. That's why I do it. That's why I do it every year. That's why I'm gone 3 or 4 weeks every year, leave the wife and kids at home. My wife, who's over here, becomes a storm chase widow for pretty much half of May and the first half of June. And it's because it's pretty much worth it hanging out with these people. All right, so if I'm doing it for fun and I'm doing it to help people see things they've never seen and to learn, I'm not making any money off of this. It's not research driven. Seems awfully dangerous just to have some collegial moments with a bunch of students, right? Okay, well, yes, I guess it is kind of dangerous, but not for the reasons that you're thinking. Every year when I lead a storm chase class, I'm nervous that something bad is going to happen. And it's never related to tornadoes. These are the things that scare me. One is hail. You see quite prominently in the middle of this image, large hail. This is one of my students from 2 years ago. We were a little northeast of Salina. I forget the name of the town exactly, but we had hail that was large enough to do some serious damage to your vehicle and to your body. This scares me because the first time we do this to a vehicle, the first time we drive a rental van paid for by the state into hail that big, is the last time we storm chase. We're done. Nobody's going to let me have a state property or state rented property again if I destroy it with baseball-sized hail. And if one of those hailstones happens to hit a student, we break an arm or get a concussion or something, are you kidding me? No. Then suddenly, all future fun is null and void. There's no chance of doing that anymore because this person has a history of injuring students. So that makes me pretty nervous. So you know what I do? I stay away from hail. It's that simple. It's not always that simple if your goal is to get close to the storm and to see whatever it is you're trying to see at all costs, then you're going to end up in hail. But our goal first and foremost is absolutely safety. That sounds cliche, but we tell students early on, we are not going to risk being hit by hail. What we will do, we'll get right behind the storm. And we'll get close enough we can hear the hail falling. They call it a hail roar. Meteorologists are not very clever. We're not poets for a reason. We're meteorologists. We observe things that are happening in nature, and we call them like we see them. What's that roaring sound? I think it's hail. We'll call that a hail roar. All right, so that's what we do. And then we'll inch along behind the storm, and we'll pick it up. We'll take photos, but we do not drive through it. This picture on the top left, this was in Colorado, about 20 miles east of Colorado Springs this past June. Looks like snow, but it's 6 inches of hail accumulated. Now this is 3-inch hail. This is 6-inch deep, pea-sized hail. Every time we drive across hail that's on the ground, a student in the van says, "Wow, it's slippery. It's like driving on ice." It is ice. Granted, it's not winter, but ice is slippery as long as it's still frozen. Otherwise, it's water, which is still slippery. So hail is a challenge. Deer and all sorts of other fuzzy, wildlife, oblivious creatures, they scare me. Because you're driving around afternoons, you're driving around evenings in rural parts of the country. What are we doing? We're looking at the sky. Hopefully our driver is looking at the road. But everybody else is looking up, and none of us see the little deer bounding across over here. So that's terrifying. Never hit one yet. Got a feeling that's going to happen. That won't end storm chasing for Fort Hays State. You know, most people end up hitting animals with their cars. It just happens. So that frightens me because it has the potential to be damaging and could cause injuries, but it's not nearly as bad to me as some of these other things. Other drivers are a problem. Well, that's anytime, anywhere, right? But we're driving through some of the most rural parts of the country, so you wouldn't think traffic would be an issue. You would be wrong. Not a damn thing. It is wide open, empty prairie. And so I'm at the end of a dirt road with a great view of this thunderstorm in front of me. It's just beautiful. I took literally hundreds of photos of this storm. And every couple of minutes, another car pulls up. I'm miles and miles and miles away from a town. I'm a few miles away from pavement. And then another car. And then another car. And then suddenly, there were about 15 cars, most of which were vans. There were more than 80 people at the end of this dirt road in rural South Dakota looking at this same storm. And so that gives you an idea of how quickly an abandoned or desolate location can become. driving slowly. And then there were a few non-storm chasers mixed in that didn't really know what was going on, and they were terrified. They were driving slowly and the head was on a swivel. Then there were a bunch of storm chasers behind them that wanted to get out in front quickly, and there was lots of tailgating and horn honking and zigging and zagging, and it became very aggressive. And there were lots of cars going over hills and around curves in the wrong lane. Really terrifying. I'm proud to say I did not take this photo. We totally missed the tornado on this day because of traffic. We came to this road and said, no way. We're not getting in that line of cars. We're going to go a mile south. We're probably going to lose a view of the storm, but we're also going to stay completely safe. Again, same thing with the hail. We don't push the envelope. This is not thrill-seeking. The students were impressed that day just seeing the traffic. And they said, oh my gosh, that's scary. That's something I never expected. Let's drop south, get out of the way. So those are things that frighten. Because I'm not immune. This is something that can happen. You can try to predict. You're trying to think, what are the other storm chasers thinking? What are the locals thinking? What road is going to be least traveled on this day that gives us the best chance of seeing storms? You know, sometimes you'll guess right, sometimes we won't. This is a photo that hopefully you can tell is a rattlesnake staring back at us through the weeds and the cactus. A student of mine took this photo. She didn't have a zoom lens. She was out of the van, and of course, I tell students the same thing every time, and sometimes you just have to learn things on your own, right? Well, I tell them, don't wear sandals. One, we're in a van all day long. Your feet will stink. Two, we're getting in and out constantly. Who knows what's on the side of the road? A sharp piece of metal, some cactus, wildlife. Doesn't matter. She's wearing sandals. She wanders off the road a few yards, and she sees a rabbit. She's taking pictures of the bunny rabbit, and she's squatted down, and she thinks it's so cool. And then she just gets up to stand up, and she sees this. And she freezes and snaps a couple pictures. And the snake was obviously after the rabbit. It never rattled. It never moved. It didn't want to give away its position. So it was about to strike the rabbit, perhaps. That's what I'm guessing. And it was coiled up, ready to roll. Never made a noise. Of course, she made quite a few noises at this point once she saw the snake. And everybody else runs over and they all get photos. You never know. So we hit a deer, we're probably okay. Hail comes through and breaks your arm, that's horrible. But we're okay. We get a little bit of traffic, that could be deadly. We get stuck in gridlock, tornado hits our van, that'd be awful. This photo was taken somewhere between Uvalde in Del Rio, Texas. Anybody know where those places are? Exactly. I'm confident there is no hospital in Uvalde. Maybe there is. I didn't see one. There's probably one in Del Rio. I don't know. But we were a good 40, 50 minutes from Del Rio. I'm thinking, had she gotten bit by the rattlesnake, maybe she wouldn't have died, but she'd have lost some limbs. You know, she'd had a new nickname when she got back home. Photo on the bottom left is a photo from this previous year. A couple of students have been chopped out there to protect the innocent. The person standing up in the middle is a guy named Dean. He's an instructor in chemistry. Dean Strammel, if you know him, pretty popular guy on campus. And there's a lightning bolt in the distance. And the first thought when a lot of people see this photo is, boy, Dean's really irresponsible. Well, I'm taking the photo. I'm out there with him. And I can promise you I am not irresponsible when it comes to lightning. Because out of all these things, lightning is the one that scares me the most. I can count the number of times I've ever seen a rattlesnake on the side of the road. I can count the number of times I've seen hail this large. I can't tell you how many times I've seen lightning that surprised people with how close it was. When I took this photo, the lightning was still about 8 or 9 miles away. We couldn't even hear the thunder. We were okay. Statistically, we were quite safe. As soon as you hear the thunder, it's too close for comfort. You are in danger, have to get inside the van or get inside a building. And so we take that very seriously. There's a little bit of debate, but not much about how you can survive a lightning strike. Physically, it is possible. However, it almost never happens. Lightning strike survivors do not get struck by lightning. They are near something that gets struck by lightning. Or they have a piece of electricity that comes from the ground and extends out of their head 30 or 40 feet and never actually connects with the lightning. and then it just collapsed back into their body, and they think they were struck. More often than not, when somebody takes a direct strike, they are done. Game over, no resuscitation. So we don't play with that. You're not coming back from a lightning strike. And there's no warning. I mean, other than the fact there's a huge thunderstorm nearby, there's no warning that it's about to hit you. It's not coming closer and closer and closer. So we do not play around with those. And here's the thing. Storm chasers will push the envelope of lightning to get that one last photo. They're out there in a field, click, 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 taking photos, taking photos. They want the beautiful lightning photo. Let me tell you how easy it is to get lightning photos. I took all of these photos, along with about 5 times as many more that look just like these, in one night. Probably like an hour and a half. It's just one particularly active storm. If you can find a good storm, and you've got a tripod and a little bit of patience, you can get all the lightning photos you want. It's not worth putting your life at risk. So tell that to students. You can buy an app for your phone for, I think, $2 that does all the work for you. All you do is sit there and talk to your friends and hold your phone up, and whenever lightning strikes, it takes the picture. That's not as fun to me. It kind of takes the work out of it, but still, it's very easy. Not worth staying outside when you hear thunder. These were all near Broken Bow, by the way. Anybody know where that is? Nebraska. So other questions. All right, why do you go? Isn't it dangerous? When do you go? People know that I'm a meteorologist. They know I chase storms. So I'll see somebody in November. You done any storm chasing lately? No. I mean, there are thunderstorms in November, but my job is not flexible enough that I can just drop everything any time of the year and drive all over the country. You try to play the odds. So you want to go out for a period that you're most likely to see thunderstorms. This starts over on the left at January 1st and goes through December 31st. And based on a few decades of data, we see our probability of having at least one tornado somewhere in the country every day. And if we see, this time of year, around February, we're looking at 25% chance. On any given day, you've got about a 1 in 4 chance of there being a tornado somewhere in the country. Not in Hayes, but in the country. By the time we get to the 1st of June, we're around 90%. Wow. That's pretty good. Now again, that tornado may be in Florida, may not be in Kansas, but the odds are good there will be somewhere in the United States a tornado. The blue lines represent the dates of our trip. So this is a little bit more than a coincidence, although it is a coincidence. Anybody know when the summer semester starts? June 6th, first day of our trip. So it has to fall within the rules of the university, but it makes sense that we take this trip at the summer course and it falls at the most probable time for tornadoes. Being a summer trip, we could easily push it to after July 4th, but you can see the probability of tornadoes drops off pretty quickly after that. So this is the when, first week or 2 of June. And this is the where. Somebody says, where are you going? Where are you going to go look for tornadoes? The best answer is wherever there's a risk for tornadoes. That sounds like kind of a smart answer, but it's the truth. I never know where I'm going to be. So whenever I get the chance to call home on these trips, the question is, where are you tonight? I'm in South Dakota. Where are you going to be tomorrow? I don't know. I've made hotel reservations a couple of days in advance before for the same night. And I made 3 reservations, one for Minneapolis, one for Omaha, and one for Kansas City. We're going to be somewhere in the greater Minneapolis, Kansas City area. Those are nowhere near each other, by the way. That's a huge range because things change so dramatically. Well, these are maps for every day of our trip last year. So this is day 1. We started in Hayes, shot north to Norton. And we had a student that slept late. She was from Norton. She got lucky. If she'd have been from La Crosse, she'd have missed the trip. So we drove through Norton. It was pretty much on the way. Went up to northern Nebraska, chased all around there, went in circles a bunch near Norfolk, and then ended up back in Sioux City for dinner, Omaha for the night. And then it's just more of that over and over again. Omaha, we shot to the west, dropped down into Belleville. You know where Belleville, Kansas is? Saw a couple of waitresses fight at a restaurant. It was pretty interesting. One of the most memorable parts of the trip. Again, non-weather related. Chased around Junction City, ultimately through Emporia, spent the night in Wichita. Next day, shot as straight as we could to northeast New Mexico, chased through some really beautiful mountains, seeing a thunderstorm with lots of lightning. The picture of Dean in the lightning bolt, that was in the mountains. Visibility was great, see a long way. Then we had a down day, shot north to Fort Collins, across Nebraska again, kind of made a big circle. Come back through Kansas City and then back down to the Texas Panhandle again. So we just made a big circle around Texas, Nebraska, Missouri, and then chased around in eastern New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle for a couple of days before finally coming back up to Hays. Some days we drove a lot, like the day we drove from Kansas City all the way down to Lubbock. Some days we didn't drive much at all. We drove from Clovis, New Mexico to just north of Amarillo, just a couple hours. But on average, it was 500 miles a day. So I enjoy doing this. I think you might enjoy doing this, unless you don't like driving. If you get car sick, it may not be for you. Although mostly we're just driving straight for long distances. There's very little of this every now and then. The New Mexico day was a little bit of that. So how do you decide where to go? That's a great question. Sometimes there's arguments involved. Sometimes there's indecision. Sometimes we will change our mind in the middle of the day. But the easy answer is that it's not that difficult. Compared to when I first started doing this in the late 90s, it was incredibly difficult. You would have maybe an hour or two in the morning at the hotel to look at data. Well, how would you do that in the late 90s? There was the internet, but it was really slow. And it would take 20 minutes to download one of these images. We had, you know what America Online is? AOL? That ring any bells? Yeah, kind of. What is it? Yeah, so these days it's just a news website that offers an email service. But in the 90s, when I was in college, it was the internet to us. It was the primary internet service provider. There was no Nextex. Everybody paid America Online, and it dialed up the internet and made some funky noise. And so we had an AOL account, and we had a 1-800 number that we would pay to use, and we'd stop in hotels and say, can we use your phone line? And usually they would let us, but this was a big deal. We're taking down the hotel's phone line in the middle of the day so that they can't get reservations. And then we would dial up AOL, download one satellite image. Anyway, long story short, it used to be terrible. We had a much lower success rate in the late 90s than we do now. Now we download these images like that, flying down the interstate with a wireless modem. Heck, I can just tether my phone most of the time and download this stuff, piece of cake. So it's relatively easy, and the whole time we're downloading model data and observations and satellite imagery, we're also looking at live radar. Not because we have a fancy van, but because we have really fancy phones. Really simple. And so the beauty of all this is we don't have to drive some sort of circus vehicle. We don't have dishes and antenna and streamers and flashing lights hanging off the van. To the rest of the world, we look like a church group. You know, we're just going to Branson or whatever other corny thing people do in vans in the summertime. The beauty of that, nobody follows or harasses us. We don't look like we're looking for trouble. And so we just look like a normal old tour group at the gas station. That's important. Because we're traveling a lot of places. We don't want to attract attention, unsavory attention to us. The challenge in making a forecast is battling between human needs, like bathroom breaks, food, sleep, and meteorology. If I'm sitting in my office and all I have to do is put a spot on the map that says this is going to be where the best storm is tomorrow, that's pretty easy. My percentage of success on that is quite high. However, doing that and making it attainable for us is the challenge. And so this was one of the most difficult decisions I've had in this way in the last couple of years. We wake up one morning in Billings, Montana. So we go wherever we need to go, right? We'll go from the Canadian border to the Mexican border. We've chased all the way across Iowa into Illinois. And of course, once you hit the Rockies, you're pretty much out of luck. But we cover a lot of ground. So we wake up in Billings. And this is the risk, the official risk, according to the National Weather Service, for the day. Just to give you an idea. So we could chase near Billings, we could chase all the way down to Denver, potentially. Tomorrow, though, is the day in our mind. Today is a decent day. Tomorrow is the day, the best day of the trip. And tomorrow's risk is closer to Lincoln, Nebraska. 12 hours of driving, 800 miles. And so we have this challenge. We're already behind because we're in mountain time zone. Do we chase today, or do we just throw away today so that we can guarantee that we're in place tomorrow? And that's always a challenge. What would hurt worse? Skipping today and being somewhere in South Dakota and Twitter starts popping up tornado photos near Billings? Or chasing today, seeing some hail, maybe a little lightning, and then missing a tornado tomorrow by an hour because we were too far behind? I don't know. I think the first one would hurt first because you gave up on it. The second one, you almost got there, but you didn't quite. So that's how we made our decision. Very unscientific, right? Suddenly I've become a sociologist or something. Psychologist. Uh-oh. Look at that. So what we did, we set a time. We cannot chase any longer than this time. And we made that time around 9 p.m. Mountain Time. Of course, I knew all along, if we are on something that's so great we can't pull ourselves away at 9 o'clock, that we're totally going to stay, because that's rare that you have something that's so awesome. And so we chased until 9. What we did see was enormous hail. We heard a hail roar, which was something the students had never heard before. We saw really beautiful skies, lots of deep greens and purples and just crazy stuff that made great photos. And then at 9 o'clock, we hit the road. We drove. When we stopped to get gas, everybody ate, everybody went to the bathroom. We managed to get about 6 hours of sleep in Spearfish, South Dakota, and kept on going. We got to our target, which was a little north and west of Lincoln, thankfully, right at 4 p.m. And when we showed up, I mean, literally, when we made our stop to get gas again, the sirens went off. First warning. Like, oh man, we made it with 0 minutes to spare. Best day of the trip. Big, picturesque supercell rotating like a top, had these striations in it, looked like a birthday cake or a wedding cake or some sort of cake. It looked great. So that's the challenge. And if we had stayed 1 hour longer in Billings, then we probably would have missed that day. It's not always like that though. Sometimes it's quite the opposite. Sometimes I'm saying, go, hurry up, let's pee, let's eat, let's get gas. And then we barely make it and it's great. See, I told you, I'm so glad you hurried up. Other times I say all that stuff and then we get somewhere and we sit around for 2 hours and do nothing. And the students are saying, why were you rushing me this morning? Just to be safe. So there's a lot of hurry up and wait. And so what we do is we find a place where we can, one, continue to receive data. We want to watch the sky, so we want to be able to see. We want to do something to entertain ourselves. So city parks are usually a common place to go. This is Burlington, Colorado. That's Gainesville, Texas. We've developed this game that we call pigskin pig or football horse. We just take a football and it's like, you know, I'll try to hit that swing set. Now you try to hit that swing set. All right, you got an H. You know, it's not that exciting, but it's what we do. It's better than throwing rocks at signs and damaging somebody else's property, I guess. But we do things to entertain ourselves. This was at a university in South Texas. They had a big plate glass window in the Union, and so we could see the direction we wanted to watch the clouds develop while we played ping pong. That was a little better. We're looking at satellite data, and this is just a few minutes separating these two images. That's the second one. Here's the first image. You just get a few little clouds over the mountains, and the next thing you know, boom, it explodes. So it can happen very quickly. So you never want to remove yourself from being able to watch the data or the clouds themselves. And then at that point, you're just chasing the storm. There's no more forecasting. You are analyzing the situation at hand, but for the most part, you just take what the atmosphere gives you. Don't overthink it. Just follow the storm that's right in front of you. Sometimes people get caught up in, they start following Twitter rather than watching their own storm. Oh, well, Twitter says there's a better storm 20 miles over there. We've got a storm right here. And you young chasers will do that. They will think that their storm doesn't look that great, so they'll leave. They'll drive 30 minutes down the road and get on another storm, and you know what happens as soon as they get over there. This thing goes nuts. Just dropping tornadoes left and right. I mean, it's just, you have to be patient. You have to stick with what you've got. The challenge, though, is staying safe. Because you want to make sure you're not missing anything if you're coming up on a city. Do you wait until the storm passes through the city and stay with it when all the people are scared and they're running around? No. you try to get out in front, or you try to go around the city. So you do have to make decisions about safety and about when is a good time to leave the storm for a few minutes so you can get a better viewing position. But for the most part, this image on the top right, all those brightly colored lines, well, you can't really tell on that zoomed in image, that is the eastern 2/3 of Kansas, all of Missouri, a lot of Illinois. Those are tornado tracks over about 60 years. They're pretty consistent. Tornadoes, most of the time, about 3/4 of the time, will travel from southwest-ish to northeast-ish. Now, certainly some do it differently, but that's approximately what they do. So you have a pretty good idea of how they're going to travel. And then once they're moving, they look pretty similar. This is an idealized picture. This is not a real storm. This is one that somebody has drawn for educational purposes. And what you see is if you're looking into the storm with the storm moving to your right, so the storm's moving that way, you're going to have a bunch of rain and hail and this really dark clouds. Then you're going to have a clear area. And this is where the storm is getting its energy. It's sucking in air into here. And then it's dropping down over there. Right where those two meet, that's usually where you're going to get the action. That's where the storm's going to manifest its rotation. If you're going to have any funnel clouds or tornadoes, that's where they're going to happen. This is that happening. This is that storm near Quinter from 2008. It happened exactly where it's supposed to happen. Here's the rain and the dark stuff. Here's the clear updraft. There's your tornado. So I'm not saying that it's easy, but it's not random. There is a method to it. And tornadoes don't really change direction that quickly. Now, their paths are not always straight, like this image shows up at the top right. This is the El Reno, Oklahoma tornado. Infamous tornado. Killed a number of storm chasers, a few of which were very well known and well respected. And the narrative of the story, depending on who you ask, is that the tornado changed path, changed direction. It did. It had a curved path. But that's not uncommon. And it did have an unusual path in that it didn't travel northeast to southwest. It traveled, in total, due east. But the way that it got there was by moving to the southeast and then back to the northeast. Unusual, not unheard of. The dangerous part of this tornado was its size. I'm pretty sure it was the largest, widest tornado ever recorded. A little over 2.5 miles wide. And it went from a quote-unquote normal tornado, meaning nowhere near that large, to that large very quickly. So imagine there's a tornado moving towards you at about 40, 50 miles an hour, which is pretty fast. And imagine while it's doing that, it's expanding. Well, you're expecting, because of the storm motion at 40 miles an hour, that all you have to do is 40 or 50 miles an hour to stay safe. But with it moving and growing, suddenly it's moving at more like 90. That was the tricky part about this storm. And so if you were in the path, then you were very much in more danger than normal. The chasers that were killed here, at least 3 of the 4 or 5 that were killed, their job was to place things in the path of the storm. It's a very vulnerable position. Most storm chasers would never consider doing that. They're trying to photograph and they want to stay with it so they keep a safe distance off to the side or something like that. So very unfortunate, but also unique situation. Not something that most chasers would do. So with that in mind, common question is, and I get this, anytime a conversation happens about storm chasing, what's the biggest tornado you've seen? What's the most you've seen in whatever, a day or a week or whatever numbers they're interested in? But also, how close do you get? The easy answer is as close as I can while still being safe. And what does safe mean? It means I'm confident that the storm's not coming toward us, and that I'm confident that it couldn't grow toward us. I'm confident that I always have a safe escape route. That's the challenge, is what if another storm moves nearby and is dropping softball-sized hail on your escape route? That was the decision that the El Reno folks had to make. They could drop south and risk being hit by the tornado, or they could have just escaped north. But if you went north, you would definitely be bombarded by softball-sized hail. So the question is, do we definitely destroy our vehicle, or do we take a chance of possibly being hit by a tornado? Those are bad things to weigh. So you always make sure you have a safe escape route. And that, in my experience, that has kept me on average about 4 miles away from tornadoes. Whenever I feel like I'm close enough that my students are starting to say, should we back up? 4 miles is usually the answer. And I haven't calculated that as something I aim for, because it's always different storms look different, situation is different, roads are different. But I've had students cry out of fear being 6 miles from a tornado, because it looks a lot closer. These things are huge. Even a, quote, small tornado is enormous, both in its width and more so in its height. How tall they are vertically is hard to understand. And so here you go. These are some storms. This is Bennington, Kansas, just north of Salina. Anybody been there? Maybe, perhaps the perfect tornado. It was enormous. It was very visible for much of its life. It lasted. It was on the ground continuously for an hour and 10 minutes. You know how far it went? 1 mile. Coincidentally, it was about 1 mile, maybe a half mile wide. In other words, it was stationary. It didn't move. We parked in the same spot the entire time. Never had to go anywhere. We were taking photos with it. We were calling people, having conversations while the tornado was on the ground, telling them about it. It was pretty awesome. We had colleagues that were an hour away almost. They had chosen the wrong storm. We start telling them how great this one is. They drive over and get the last few minutes of it. Great, great tornado. Injured nobody. Injured some cattle. No people were injured. Did a little bit of damage to some outbuildings on a farm. But had this thing been moving at 20 miles an hour, it would have destroyed 3 or 4 towns. So every situation is different. The one in Colorado we talked about earlier, we were 5 miles away, 5 miles here, storm near, somewhere out to the west of here, maybe almost to Oakley. This was in western Kansas near Tribune. I think that was also about 5 miles. So again, this was one that was the closest to Hayes. Maybe some of you saw this. This was 2012, just south of Walker. So if you go east, here on I-70, you've got the little town of Walker. Go about 5 miles south of that. And look, there's a post rock there to give you an idea. Barbed wire on the post rock fence. And we were 8 miles away from that one. Here's some video of a storm that produced 2 tornadoes. This was just outside of Topeka. The tornadoes happen in this video, but the condensation funnel doesn't touch all the way down. So there is damage and there's swirling on the ground, but don't look for it in this video. It'll happen so fast because the video is sped up. But this just gives you an idea. This is one of the times I had a student cry because she thought we were much too close. I don't want to build this up too much if it's not going to play. Here we go. So this is with Western Kentucky University. There's no sound, but it's just a sped up time lapse. And you can see, obviously, the entire storm is rotating, which is something that most people don't realize. It's not just the funnel part. I'm not sure why it's so jerky here, but the whole thing is spinning. And again, it has that kind of upside down cake appearance. This is the wall cloud. This is obviously the funnel. This is the turnpike coming out of Topeka there. So we're just barely on the south edge of town. Storm is moving toward the northeast. And we're going to exit off here in a minute and start going around the southeast side of town. So now we're looking back toward the northwest. A couple of funnels. One of these touches down at this point. There's a racetrack on the southeast side, or like a drag strip race facility in Topeka. This hit that area. That gives you an idea of what this was like. At some point here, my bald head makes an appearance. Just so you know, it's actually my video, right? Josh Durkee is my colleague that leads some of these trips with me, and this was his university's trip. So this is where the student is uncomfortable. She thinks that not necessarily we are in danger, but she feels as though these people who are out in their driveway, she thinks they're done. She thinks they're about to be hit. Well, at this point, we are still 1 mile south of I-70, and the tornado funnel cloud at this point, the tornado just moments ago, is on the north side of I-70. So we are literally more than a mile away. But it looks like it's right on top of these people. And so that's what made her so uncomfortable. It's all about perspective. And if you've not been, imagine you're from Kentucky. You're not used to the wide open skies. You're not used to the lack of trees. And so your perspective is skewed. You see these tornadoes, and then suddenly you reintroduce trees for scale, and it seems like you're much closer. And that's the kind of thing that is interesting. If you're driving along the plains, the wind can be blowing 60 miles an hour and it doesn't sound scary because all you hear is the wind through your ears. Then you drive through a little town and the wind is going through the leaves on the trees and it sounds much more ominous. It has a much stronger sound. And so 30 mile an hour wind in Kentucky sounds scary, whereas 60 mile an hour wind in Kansas is really not making that much noise. These little things tend to set off your emotions and your recall of what safety means or what danger means. Here are some other reasons to stay a safe distance away from the storm. Some of the best images you're going to get are the structure, the spaceship shape of the storms, not just the zoomed in funnel doing damage. People don't understand how beautiful the storms can be because you've got this thing that's 10 miles in diameter, that the whole thing is spinning. And sometimes it's spinning disproportionately or unevenly, and it looks twisted, like you took a towel or something and twisted it up. And so you get these striations, barber pole type shapes, and those are really pretty impressive. And so I love any chance we get to watch storms do that. I'm not much of a time-lapse guy, but that's a big thing these days in meteorology. Just put a GoPro on your roof and let it sit there and watch the storm, and then you speed it up, and you can see this whole thing spinning quite smoothly. Really kind of impressive. Another reason that you stay far away, it's really difficult to fathom how strong wind gets above 50 or 60 miles an hour. And there's an equation down here that the energy associated with wind is related to this constant times the speed of the wind cubed. So it's exponential. Okay, so what does that mean? It means if you, quote, double the speed, if you go from 20 to 40, you don't double the energy. You increase the energy by 8 times. Well, from 20 to 40, that's not that big a deal. From 40 to 60 is starting to become a big deal. You know, like, for example, the way I like to explain this, 30 mile an hour wind, something you experience commonly. Living in Kansas, more common than most. 60 mile an hour wind, most of you have experienced that, if not directly. If you weren't standing in it, you at least were in a building when it happened, and you walked outside and there were limbs down, maybe power lines down. This happens a few times and we have it in our memories as big events. 90 miles an hour, odds are nobody in this room has experienced 90 miles an hour. 90 miles an hour is pretty incredible. It is 8 times as strong as a 45 mile an hour wind, which would wake you up at night here in Kansas. 90 is barely able to walk. Your car can't be kept on the road. And so 90 miles an hour, that's among the weakest tornadoes ever. That's nothing. We're talking about 150, 200 mile an hour wind. This is what happens. This is a farm truck. This is a dually 1-ton pickup truck wrapped around a pole like it was made of aluminum foil. This was a relatively new car, a small car, Chevy Cobalt, infamously known now because this was from the El Reno tornado where the storm chasers were killed. You can see why. So not to be gruesome, but this is another reason we keep our distance. There's nothing worth playing around with. We've all seen plenty of video of people that didn't know any better or people that were just trying to push the envelope that get into the outer circulations of a tornado and they survive. That's fine. There's plenty of evidence, though, that suggests slight error puts you in a place of no recovery. So we don't play around with that. Okay, so now that I've talked about death and destruction to end the class, or in the talk, let's talk about the class. If anybody's interested, go ahead and get some details out of the way. It is expensive. It is much more expensive than a regular course because we don't sit in a building that's already paid for. We have to go out and about. We have to pay for fuel, pay for vans, pay for hotels. And so it is 3 hours of tuition, which this year, whether you're a resident or out of state, doesn't matter because it's a virtual college course, costs you $582 for the full 3 hours. Then we add money for all of our travel. We stay in hotels, but we don't stay in grungy motels. I used to. Remember I talked about looking like a church group, not attracting attention? It's particularly important at night. You don't want somebody knowing where you drove to sleep. You don't want to be in a place where the doors are on the outside of the building. It's just general safety when you've got 8 students. No matter where you come, what town you drive through, you're going to look out of place you're going to attract attention. So we stay pretty nice, Hampton Inn, Holiday Inn Express, stuff like that. Get the van, we get our fuel for 500 miles a day, which is a lot cheaper this year than last year. And then we have to have plenty of data. So we usually have a Verizon data card, and then maybe a Sprint or an AT&T, because they vary state to state as to which works best. And you can't quite see it, it's almost cut off a little bit, but for 8 students in a van with 2 instructors, ends up being $1,500 per student, or $150 a day. It's a 10-day trip. And I clipped this out from one of the more reputable, more well-known, more successful private industry storm chase tours. If you were to just get online and say, I want to go on a tour, storm chase trip, Tempest is one of the well-known groups. They have a 6-day trip that, at this point, is sold out. It's approximately the same days as our trip, and it costs $2,345. So they're at almost $400 a day. So expensive for a 3-hour course, but quite cheap compared to other chasing tour type activities you might get a chance to do. People want to know, well, what are the odds that I'll see something? Every year is tremendously different. I hesitate to put these numbers up here, but in the interest of being completely open, this is what we've done the last several years. And I mentioned that 2010, which as far as classes go, this was a group of students we took from Western Kentucky, was our most successful by far. That was a post-El Nino year. This is also a post-El Nino year, so me and all of my weather nerd buddies keep getting excited about this. We would like to see more snow and rainfall in the high plains to really get the ground saturated to help the storms this spring, but we'll see how that works out. But on average, if you add all these up, it's about every 5 to 7 days you end up seeing a tornado. That's a useless stat though, right? Averages are just kind of the smoothing over the extremes. There's been days where we've seen 6, and there's been 2-week stretches where we saw nothing. 2006 is not up here. I didn't have room to go back that far, thank goodness. 2006 was the worst year ever. But what does the worst year mean? Worst year of storm chasing. We didn't see any tornadoes and we only saw a few storms. Saw some awesome stuff. We went to Arches National Park. We went to Yellowstone. We did stuff that was still related to the geosciences and the environment. And everybody had a blast. Lots of cool photos. Just didn't necessarily see what we had hoped in terms of weather that year. Okay, I'll stop talking. There's my contact info again, but it's cut off. I can tell you how to email me if you're interested. Any questions? Yes, sir.
In Moore, Oklahoma, I think I've heard that it seemed that there were 3 tornadoes that have hit that basically the same path. Is that common?
Common is a strong word, but it's not unique. So Moore, Oklahoma, at this point I think everybody is familiar with Moore. It's a suburb of Oklahoma City. It's been hit by numerous tornadoes, 3 of which were pretty big, and their paths all crossed in close proximity to each other. Prior to that, there was an area right near the end of the runway in Birmingham, Alabama at their airport. It was the only known place on the planet where 2 F5 tornadoes had crossed. And so there are some precedents for that, but perhaps better than that, as an example, a colleague of mine named Jim Elsner is at Florida State. He's another tornado researcher. He put together a map a while back that split the country into grid cells, little grid boxes that were all the same area as the city limits of Moore, Oklahoma. And then he counted how many times tornadoes had crossed into all those grid boxes. And there were a couple of dozen around the country that had had as many or more tornadoes as Moore. And one of those grid boxes was the northwest corner of Ellis County. Kind of overlaps Ellis and just goes into the northern part of that county. So it's not unique, and even in our part of the country we have spots that behave kind of like Moore. It just so happens nobody lives in that corner of Ellis County, so it hasn't made news. Yep.
We've always heard, people who've lived around this area have always heard that because of the way the formation of the land in the southwest, that storms seem to dissipate or go over. And so we've come to feel fairly comfortable if something's coming from the southwest. My more recent observations are seems to be more of a danger of storms that do come from the path of tornadoes that travel from the east to the west, or come in from a different direction from the northwest, coming southeast.
Well, there's a lot there. I mean, in general, when somebody says I've observed that my town is more likely or less likely to be hit by a tornado because you're totally wrong. It's all in our head. And here's the reason. It's a selection bias. Let's say you grew up at Hayes, and you notice every time a storm barely misses Hayes and hits Russell, right? Do you ever notice how many times a storm barely misses Waukene and hits Hayes? No, who cares about Waukene? Do you ever notice how many times a storm barely misses Russell? No. That's downstream of it. Who cares about Russell? Right? You care about your place, and so you think, you kind of split things into a binary, and it is my town and everywhere else. And you think that whenever your town gets missed, everywhere else gets hit. And so almost every single place in the country thinks their town prevents tornadoes somehow. A few places, like Moore, think that they attract. And none of this can be shown. Most of it is human perception. But the terrain thing, there is something there. So again, the guy Jim Elsner, he and I have done some research lately that suggests there is a slight effect of slope or smoothness on the terrain. And it would be much more dramatic than, say, the hills where the wind farm would be. But coming down from Goodland to Kansas City, or suddenly changing the smoothness from, say, the Flint Hills to the High Plains, right? We go from something like this to suddenly very smooth. Those do have an effect, and it's single percentage points or less that can accumulate over a long period. So it's not like there's going to be this, line when you leave Manhattan and get to Salina where the tornadoes increase. But so the answer is it's there, but it's subtle, and there's nothing that keeps Hayes safe whatsoever.
How about the storms that I know that most people observe southwest to northeast, but what if it comes from east to west or northwest to southeast?
It shouldn't matter. I mean, again, the scale of what the terrain is going to affect, there's no feature. If there was a mountain range between here and Norton, then that'd be different. But no, whether the tornado comes from one direction or the other shouldn't affect our safety by any means. And I'm trying to think of any odd direction storms we've had recently. I can't think of any here, but they certainly do happen. And that Gerald, Texas tornado was one that I talked about. Everything about that looked normal. The storm was oriented the same way, and in general that day storms were moving towards the northeast. But the storm actually moved, quote unquote, backwards. And so it's not like it was oriented this way and moved that direction. It was oriented the correct way, so to speak, and just happened to propagate backwards. Like the one in Bennington didn't move at all. The one in Gerald moved towards the southwest. That was really rare. And so that does happen occasionally. And that's scary because people are familiar with you know what it looks like when a storm passes? Suddenly blue sky, lots of sun, the rainbow, all that stuff. Imagine if you see that and then the storm moves into you. That's a scary thing, but that's very rare. All right, I'm going to hang out. I've been going on for like 50 minutes now, so you can take off if you need to, but I'll be around for a few minutes if you have any other questions. Thanks a lot.